welcome nerds to an exclusive conversation that we're only putting up on, I think this is probably going to go up on the Instagram as well as the YouTube Clips channel. So, let's get into this conversation, shall we? CBR. CBR.com is a place that I sometimes will go for comic book news when we're doing research for the main episode, the Week in Nerddom. It goes up on the main channel. I came across a defense of Obi-Wan that I just feel like needed to be addressed. Obi-Wan, the series, not the character. So let's get into this. I'm going to have to read chunks of this article in order to fully discuss this situation. And all right, so before we actually read this, let's establish something. There have been 2 episodes. I have not yet watched episode 4 or episode 5. They will be watched very, very soon. So by the time this episode is posted, or this video rather is posted, I will be able to defend myself a little bit more eloquently as far as the current episodes go in the comments section. So bring out the hate, nerds. But as it stands right now, as of filming, I have only seen up to episode 3 of the Obi-Wan series. That out of the way, we also need to address what the continuity errors are, and the existence of this series is creating them. So the first one, the continuity error with the Holy Trilogy obviously being episodes 4 through 6, so New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Those 3 episodes. When Vader and Obi-Wan meet for what we see as the first time as far as the way these movies are released, when Vader and Obi-Wan meet, there is a conversation had. There's actually just a line of dialogue said by Darth Vader where he says, and I'm going to quote this, Vader says, "When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master." So, this is implying that when they were last together, when they last met, that Padawan Anakin and Jedi Master Obi-Wan were in a teacher-student relationship. That is the way that it has been since the dawning of time as far as Star Wars is concerned. And so this series, putting Vader and Obi-Wan in the same room together, and also there's a line about how Vader, when he senses Obi-Wan in the vicinity, that it's something he hasn't sensed for many years. Now, the many years kind of implies a longer time period than roughly 8. Maybe it's 10, if I'm remembering that correctly, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood between the Obi-Wan series and A New Hope, because Luke is supposed to be pretty young. I think he's supposed to be late teens, maybe early 20s, something in that neighborhood, and he's like 10 or 12 in the, I guess 8 or 10 or something, in the series, in the Obi-Wan series. So, I mean, that one I can see being a little bit easier to explain away, but the master and learner line, not so much. Okay, so let's go through. At first, CBR kind of outlines the issue like I just did. And the second continuity error is Reva's character killing the head Inquisitor or the Grand Inquisitor rather, because we see him in Rebels. That takes place after this. So they're breaking Holy Trilogy canon and Disney canon. So you're losing all over the place there, Disney. All right, so the CBR clip, and I'll try to put it up on screen and such. They're talking about the flashbacks that happen in one of the 2 episodes that I have not yet seen. So we do see Anakin as a Padawan again, which is cool. Hayden Christensen, I've seen the pictures and stuff so far, so I know it exists and I know what it looks like. I can kind of fill in the blanks. I dig it. I think that's a fun thing to add to the visuals of this, even though it doesn't need to exist. But they have conversation, and there is a line that happens between Obi-Wan and Anakin that CBR is trying to say fixes the Holy Trilogy issue. So the line is, Obi-Wan says to Anakin, he sees how upset Anakin is and tells him, "You're a great warrior, Anakin, but your need to prove yourself is your undoing. Until you overcome it, a Padawan you will still be." So this is trying to set up that when he sees him as Darth Vader, who is the be-all and end-all of badass in the Star Wars universe, when he becomes Darth Vader, that he still is trying to prove himself to someone. Now, an argument could be made that Vader was always trying to prove himself to people. He always has lines of dialogue that kind of put him in this inferiority complex. He always sees somebody as being bigger than him. The Emperor, Obi-Wan, just Qui-Gon earlier. Like there's always somebody that he's subjecting himself to in a way. So that line of dialogue kind of helps the character of Vader, sure. But does it excuse the continuity error? I don't think so. So let's get into the argument that CBR makes. They go on to say, and we're just going to read this whole chunk. This line helps to establish that no matter when they last met, Obi-Wan won't think of Anakin as a master until he overcomes himself. So then Obi-Wan never thinks of Vader as a master, because Vader never overcomes himself until after Obi-Wan becomes one with the Force, and so it's irrelevant at that point. So when they meet in Episode 4, he still wouldn't have seen him as a master if this line is correct. If this argument is valid, then he's always going to be a Padawan until he decides to bring balance to the Force and kill the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. So already we're seeing the argument start to get holes. And then the next chunk is, Anakin was constantly seeking the approval of others. First Qui-Gon, then the Jedi Council, then Obi-Wan. He never wanted to fail anyone in his life. This is partially what drove him to the dark side, and Darth Vader in Obi-Wan Kenobi is still stuck in that cycle, seeking validation from his old master. After all, his biggest losses have always been against Obi-Wan. He wants to beat him fairly. He needs to. It may even be why he let him go in Part 3. At this point in time, Vader is still a slave to the desire for validation. What in the third episode gives you that impression? He is the master of everything around him. Can you argue that he let Obi-Wan go? Or even, I don't understand how you can come to the conclusion that he's looking for validation from Obi-Wan. He is a completely different animal at this point. He is the master of the freaking dark side, and Obi-Wan is the embodiment of what he views the light side as. So, why would he need the validation of Obi-Wan to be an evil badass? Again, poking holes. I'm not poking the holes. I'm just exposing the holes. Oh boy. Okay. So the context of their meeting in Episode 4 has now changed. The CBR article goes on. This is certain, but that doesn't make it a plot hole. Instead of that line referring to Revenge of the Sith, it's now referring to the fact that Vader no longer seeks Obi-Wan's or anyone else's approval. By the time he sees him in the series, he is at that point. There is no evidence to suggest otherwise. He knows that he is powerful. He knows that he has learned. And he knows that there is hardly anyone left in the galaxy that could beat him. He is a master of the dark side and a master of himself. No, he's not. No, he's not. He has an inferiority complex. He always sees himself as second fiddle to somebody. Grand Moff Tarkin, not necessarily. But, Grand Moff does kind of push him around a little bit too. A little bit. So I don't, this argument is nonsense. It's nonsense. During Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's still learning that by New Hope, he has mastered it. And, oh God, rewatch the Holy Trilogy, CBR. Obi-Wan Kenobi has taken a lot of care in making sure that the Star Wars canon stays intact, despite, quote, killing the Grand Inquisitor. See, they even recognize that is an issue, but they're not going to try and explain that one away, at least not until the series ends next week, I think, this week maybe. Using the flashbacks in Part 5 to explain the line in New Hope is an incredibly clever and simple way to keep the story moving forward. All right, so here's we already know that this is a garbage argument. So here's what I think they're going to try to do in Episode 5. Again, I have not yet watched it, so this is not a spoiler. This is my conjecture. What I think is going to happen is, because Vader soundly handed Obi-Wan his ass in Episode 3. That, I think, is without question. He just didn't kill him. He let him go. Okay, fine. So, because Vader is such a master of his saber and all of the different ways of the dark side, what I think is going to happen is, and this is also kind of a way to give Obi-Wan a bit more of a story arc, because as of, again, Episode 3, he is pretty down on himself. He doesn't think that he's a Jedi Master anymore because he hasn't trained for so long and he's trying to hide and blah, 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 blah. So, in order to give him a character arc, they're going to have him lose to Vader in Episode 3, and then in Episode 6, the final episode of the season, of the miniseries, they're going to have him beat Vader. That way, they can say, oh, see, he treated him like a master, and Vader still had a lot more to learn. So Vader was like a Padawan. He was like a learner. Because it doesn't say Padawan in New Hope, probably because Lucas hadn't come to find that and use that word yet in context of a learner. So that is the only feasible way that there's a very, very thin argument to be made that could be why he says what he says in A New Hope. But even then, that is such a thin argument. Like, just the fact that they meet, the only way that this series really could exist and not break canon of the Holy Trilogy is if they actually had not met, is if Obi-Wan and Vader had just been like in Fifth Element, where your main protagonist and your main antagonist never meet. That's the only way that this could have worked properly. Since that didn't happen, it's broken, and there's really no way to fix that. This is just oh man, as much as I want to love what Disney does, and as much as it would be great if it was removed from the Holy Trilogy or even the prequel trilogy, that's not the case. It's connected, so we need to pay closer attention to that connective tissue. Otherwise, you're just going to alienate the entire fan base and nobody's going to care anymore. Thank you very much for joining me on this random argument right here on Generally Nerdy, the Nerd News Clips channel, or if this gets posted on the Instagram, I'm not sure where it's going. But either way, I feel like this conversation needed to happen, because maybe there's somebody out there a little bit more eloquent than CBR who can find a better argument for what they're doing in this series. I don't think a better argument exists, but I'm willing to hear it nonetheless. So we're going to head out of here right now, nerds. Thank you for joining me. We will see you in the next video. Before we go, always remember that if it's generally nerdy, it's probably here.